Teatime, yeah, making a difference, one cup at a time. Teatime, yeah, this is Teatime, yeah, making a difference, one cup at a time. Teatime, yeah. So be sure to grab your tea, grab a seat, and tune in to Miss Liz. Teatime, making a difference, one cup at a time. Tea time, yeah. Tea time, time, time.
Welcome. We are here and it is evening tea time. That's right. We're on the third and last show of end of the week. And then we will be back next Thursday, 3 more shows. But let's get this one over with tonight. And we have in the studio with me tonight, joining and sharing on the 17th century sword fighting, horseback riding, music, you name it. We're going to talk it tonight on Tea Time. But before we get to that, we're going to do the disclaimer and we're going to do her quick bio. And then we're going to have her jump in and share her tea tonight with all of you out there. So the disclaimer for Miss Liz's Tea Times live show. Miss Liz myself is going live using StreamYard. Before leaving a comment, please grant StreamYard permission to see your name at StreamYard.com. Please be advised that the content brought forward for any Tea Time show hosted by myself, Miss Liz, is always brought forward in good faith, however, may bring forth dialogue and opinions that are not representative of my platform. The facts and information are perceived to be accurate at the given time of airing. All Tea Time guests and audience participation are responsible for using their good judgment and taking any action that may relate to this discussion. The content brought forward may include discussions for some where they may be emotionally at risk. It is significant to know that this show is engaging in discussion forums only to offer and inspire awareness and connection and is not providing therapeutical advice. If you have any questions about this disclaimer, or the panelist discussion, you may freely contact me, Miss Liz, through my email at bookingmissliz@gmail.com. Moving forward, should you choose to voluntarily participate in tonight's show in any aspect, Miss Liz welcomes you. Should you decide that the show is not made for you at this time, I respect that and I will see you at a later show at a later date and time. So there we go. Disclaimer is out of the way. Now let me introduce my incredible guest that I have that has been supported and sponsored by Creative Edge tonight. So I want to let you know that tonight we're going to talk some history. We're going to talk some 17th centuries. And we're going to really create a strong cup of tea. So J.M. Landels, she is a sword fighter, warrior, author, and horse riding. And in addition to her work as a writer, editor, artist, and publisher, J.M. Landels teaches swordplay and horseback riding, sometimes both at the same time. In Langdale, BC, she drew on this experience as well as her time as a rock musician and childbirth educator to inform her fantasy trilogies, Abigail Song. She is currently working on a new series, La Bergers, featuring a shepherdess turned spy into the 17th century France. And my tongue is getting tired. I think it's It's been a long day. So let me get J.M. Landers in here and let's spill some tea. Welcome, Jennifer.
Hi, Miss Liz. Delighted
How
to
are
be
you?
here.
My tongue is just a twist, twist, twist. It's so. Could you let the viewers and listeners know where you're from and all of that good stuff?
All right, so I write as J.M. Landels, and I'm based out of Langley, BC, and we're on the Stolo and Kwantlen First Nations here. And just as you were starting the show, the sun came out. It's still early evening here, and I wish you could all see outside my window because there's this beautiful golden sun hitting the dark sky, and it's absolutely gorgeous. But it's kind of dark inside the house. But sorry you can't see.
Oh
Um,
wow!
anyway, yeah, I'm here on my farm in Langley where I teach riding and horsemanship and mounted combat. And this is also my office where I write. And I just released the third song in my trilogy, Elenia's Song. And that one is not a 17th century. That one is a fantasy. I'm currently working on a 17th century historical fiction series.
Well, thank you for sharing that, and I'm sorry that I got the title wrong.
Oh no, don't worry.
Like
It's my fault for creating a hard to pronounce title.
So, what got you into the 17th century writing?
Well, interestingly enough, it was an area when I did my bachelor's degree in English. It was my least favorite area in English literature. And then later on, I guess probably about 15 years ago, I decided to deliberately go back into that area, do some reading, do some research. And I ended up getting really fascinated with the period. It's a very interesting period. It's kind of a borderline where scientific thinking is starting to take over from alchemy, and people like Isaac Newton was both an alchemist and what we would call scientist these days. So it's a very very interesting conjunction of ideas happening in that century. Then what happened? As I was researching that, I found that there was a school in Vancouver that teaches swordplay, because I was researching 17th century rapier, and lo and behold, oh, there's a course in 17th century rapier, and it's right here in Vancouver. Sign me up. And that was, oh gosh, it must have been at least 12 years ago.
Wow.
So that took me down a swordplay rabbit hole for quite some time, which then became another profession, in that I ended up starting a mounted combat program and teaching people how to use swords as well as ride horses.
So, is it really challenging to sword fight and ride a horse at the same time?
The hardest part is riding a horse. If you know how to ride a horse, you've got, I would say, 80% of the job done. So learning the sword play is a lot easier than learning the riding, especially as an adult. We often learn riding when we're kids, and that's when it's really easy. And then as an adult, it does take a lot of hours in the saddle.
So, go ahead.
But, it is something we teach people, even if you've had no riding at all. We will have you up and with a sword in your hand on horseback within a year.
Wow, 1 year. It might take me 1 year to ride the horse. So the weight of the sword and the sound of the swords hitting, that doesn't make the horses afraid, or?
Horses get used to it really fast. They don't tend to be bothered by swordplay that much. Once they know that you're not there to hit them, they kind of fall asleep.
Oh,
Yeah, I have a thoroughbred that I use as my main horse, and she can be having her thoroughbred moments, and as soon as I pick up a sword, and she sort of goes, "Oh, okay, it's this," and time to have a nap.
so does it take a lot of work to learn how to use the sword? on the horse?
Well, what we do is we start people on the ground with the sword. So
Okay.
we do it separately. So, your class is in the morning, you're learning how to ride and look after your horse. Your class in the afternoon, you're learning the sword play. And then when we feel you're at a sufficient level of both, then you get to combine them.
So, and how long have you been riding horses?
All my life. I've got a picture of me as a baby on a horse, so before I could walk. I think my first full sentence was, "I want a horse." Um,
So, do you remember what your first horse looked like?
oh yeah, my first horse. Oh, you never forget any of your horses. Never mind your first one. My first pony. My dad finally caved when I was 8 years old, and he got me a pony, which was a little Shetland or Shetland cross Pinto, dark bay Tobiano, and yeah, he was a little stinker, but he taught me a lot.
So, we have a question here in JM. And what changed your mind for the 17th century?
I think it was just a deliberate. I wanted to research. I wanted to get back into history. I'd sort of abandoned my PhD thesis in medieval English literature when the BC government wouldn't give me a student loan, and I said, "Oh well, I'll just stop studying for my PhD, and I'll study, and I'll do something different." That's when I joined a rock band.
Oh.
Because you can do a PhD anytime in your life. You can only do a rock band when you're young.
So, do you want to share a little bit about your rock band?
Yeah. Well, it was. I had several. I started out. I was living in London, England at the time, and so I just went. I stopped my thesis, so I put that on hold. I went and joined a was kind of a women's collective where they were doing classes in sound engineering and things like that. I had already learned guitar, but because my significant other is an amazing guitarist, and he had taught me a little bit. I'd done some air band in university, and we'd actually gotten quite good at that, and opened for bands like the Scramblers at clubs like Graceland in Vancouver. But I thought, well, okay, I'm going to go and do this for real, try this out. So I did some sound engineering, and then I answered an ad for a band which was Hellbent for Leather, looking for a rhythm guitarist. That was the first. It was an all-girl band. That one broke up, as bands do. Some of the members of that band and I formed another band called the Sisterhood. And then that band broke up, as others do. And then I decided, well, my partner here is an amazing guitarist. I should really be using him. So we put some recordings together. This was all in the UK. Then we moved back from England. We moved back to Vancouver. Had another band here. And then once I got pregnant with my first, I think our last gig, I was 6 months pregnant, and then after that I stopped because there was just too much else going on in my life.
So, are you still in a band today, or you just?
I'm not. My partner is. He's actually out rehearsing tonight. Every once in a while I pick it up, but yeah, I haven't done anything seriously. It was once I had little kids, it was really hard to find time to practice, and little hands reaching for the strings all the time. And you never want to wake up the babies.
Oh, you were a big hardcore rocker.
Yeah, it was indie. It was sort of indie punk metal, that sort of, yeah.
So, in between heavy metal and rock.
Yeah.
So, what was your favorite song to perform?
Oh, favorite song to perform actually might have been some of the covers that we did. Like we used to always open by covering "Shove" by L7. But of the ones of our own original stuff, I guess The Wicked Lady still has a soft spot in me, and it's funny because that actually takes you back to that 17th century. Because I watched the movie The Wicked Lady, which is like um, it's an old black and white movie, and I just really hated the ending. So I wrote a song with a better ending.
Oh.
Yeah.
So what year was that movie made, Wicked Lady?
Oh, it's why I don't know, 1930s, I guess. I can't remember now.
So it's a black and white movie.
An old black and white movie, yeah. Yeah,
I
about
love
a
those.
highwaywoman. But she ends up dying. A spoiler alert. And I didn't like that. So I wrote an ending where she didn't die. That was the song, The Wicked Lady.
Wicked Lady lived on.
Yeah. Yeah, the full title is The Wicked Lady Rides Again.
Oh, I like that. That's pretty cool. That's like a bike and like a biker song. Like,
Yeah.
Ride on, right? So a little bit more about your books, JM. Could you share a little bit on how people can get your books and what one like there's three of them, I believe, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so I've got three books. The first one is Alenia's Song Overture, and then we have Alenia's Song Aria was the second, and then just released in December, the third book,
Yeah.
Chorale. So you can find them. There's a link on my website, stiffbunnies.com, but you can also find them directly from the publisher, pulpliterature.com, or on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Kobo, all those. If you type in my name, it'll pretty much come up. It's an unusual name.
So how did you get the titles for your books?
So Alenia is Alenia is the main character. Alenia's song is because it's a fantasy, and her ability is to sing music into magic. So she can turn music into magic. And the three titles, Overture, Aria, and Chorale, reflect that. So Overture obviously is the beginning. Aria is the book and middle book when she is out on her own in the world. So that's her solo time. And Chorale is all the voices coming together. So she's, you're getting all the storylines coming together, because there are three main storylines in each book. One is Alenia's, and one is her grandmother, Dane, who is a seer, and she can see the future, not always accurately, but she's so that's her story, and then her mother's story, because her mother, en route to her wedding, went missing for 2 weeks. And then her story is told, what happened in those 2 weeks. That's told in the first book. And then in the second and third book, the stories of Dane and Larissa, the mother and grandmother, fill in a lot of stuff you kind of wondered about in the first book.
So are these names from the 17th century?
No, these books are not 17th century. So these are pure fantasy, just set in an alternate world, a sort of probably, Renaissance, medieval period fantasy world. The 17th century stuff I'm working on is a different series called La Bergère, or the Shepherdess.
Yes.
And that one, some of those have been serialized in Pulp Literature magazine, and there's currently an excerpt. Where are we there? In this issue here, which is the fall issue. And that one is about a shepherdess turned spy in 17th century France.
So have you ever been to France?
Many times. That's my go-to holiday destination. Some people like to go to Hawaii. Some people, want to go Mexico. I go to France.
So how many times have you been to France?
I've kind of lost count, because when I lived in London, that was also our go-to we lived in London for about 4.5 years. So France is just right across the channel. We'd kind of hop on a ferry, rent a car, and see which way the wind blew, which way we'd drive. But we very seldom got out of France, because we liked it so much. The food is fabulous. There are castles galore, and being Canadian, we could at least get by in French a little bit better than we could in Italian or German.
So, what was your favorite food in France?
Oh, too many to name, but I do love a good cassoulet de canard, which is, you know, a basically it's baked beans, but they're baked beans like you've never tasted before. With usually, I like cassoulet with duck or cassoulet d'oie, which is goose. But usually they have other things in them as well. So they have the beans and they have sausages and they might have a little bit of lamb or some duck or some goose. It's kind of like any leftovers you have, but it is the most glorious dish. And they sell it in cans there, and you would not believe that canned beans could taste so good.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, making beans is a big thing
Mm.
here in Canada, right?
Yeah.
We usually do them in the wintertime. I always make like a big pan of beans and toast, and have the kids over and that. So a little bit more on the horseplay and the sword fighting. For anybody that would like to know more, like, do you provide lessons in that as well?
I do. If you go to academycavallo.ca, so that one is academy spelt with an IE, and cavallo, CAVALLO, and it's a .ca. There's a website there. There's a newsletter that you can sign up to, and you can get articles on sword fighting and horsemanship and things like that. And I do, for those people that are in the lower mainland of BC, we do weekly lessons. Like every week, we're out there teaching riding, teaching swordplay, and putting them both together.
Yeah, because we had a little discussion before the show started because you said Cornwall, and I was like, oh, let me see where she is, and then I'm like, oh no, she's not in Cornwall.
Oh, and for people on the East Coast, I may be going to Nova Scotia in July. Um, that's not 100% confirmed yet. It might be the July long weekend, or it might be a couple of weeks after that. So I'll be out there for a weekend teaching. So it's Annapolis Valley HEMA. HEMA is HEMA, which stands for Historical European Martial Arts. So they're bringing me out there.
Oh,
So
that's pretty
if you're on the far east or the far west, somewhere in the middle, you know,
cool. You like Cornwall?
other places I'm traveling to, I'm planning to go to Winnipeg for PEMACON this summer, which is July. Well, I know it's on my birthday. It's the middle of July. And then there's also hoping to go to Calgary for When Words Collide, which is the last When Words Collide conference, the first weekend of August. So, and again, anybody in those parts of the country, get in touch with me if if you'd like me to come out to your farm or whatever and do a lesson or your riding stable or whatever, or if you just like a sword play lesson, get in touch and we can do something.
So, is there different weights for the swords?
Swords are not as heavy as people generally think they are. Like a rapier, which is your musketeer's sword. So that's like your long, slender sword that the Three Musketeers would have used with the fancy grip. That one, like a couple of pounds at most. And then a long sword, which is your typical knight's sword, again, only 2.5 to 3 pounds. So they're not super heavy. On the ground, we use real swords. So they are real weight. They are the real dimensions. They're made out of the same materials that would be made out of historically. The only difference is they're not sharp.
Okay.
Because we like our friends and we want to continue to have people to play.
I always wondered about that with the sword fights. Are they really are they sharp to do the sword fighting?
Well, modern swordplay, no, they're not sharp. and they're blunted at the end, usually with like a rubber blunt at the end, and the edges are not sharp at all. However, they are still dangerous. A longsword, especially, is a long piece of steel, and if you hit somebody with that, and if they're not wearing protection, you would definitely kill them if you hit them on the head with a longsword. So we do wear fencing mask, like you see in the Olympics, the typical sort of fencing mask. And then depending on the type of weapon, if you're playing with long swords, you're going to want, reinforced shoulders and chest and throat and all, pretty much full body protection. With rapier, we don't wear as much armor. We still wear throat protection, which is a gorget. We wear the mask to protect the face, and gloves, and generally fairly thin gloves. And that's, you can fence full speed with rapier with only that material. A lot of people like to wear a chest protector because you do get bruised. So I'd say any women who have not yet had all their babies would probably want to wear a chest protector to protect those.
So is it heavy, the fencing outfit?
Not particularly. And I mean, I don't do armored fighting, which is in, the metal armor. But even those, they are heavy, but they're very well fitted. So, the armor is fitted to your body so that it rests at specific places on your waist and doesn't all hang off your shoulders, things like that. The undergarments have strings on them to actually attach the armor to the padded underlay, and that actually supports the metal armor itself. So again, it's not just clanking around on your body, it's quite snug.
So it's almost like a scuba diving suit?
Not quite that tight. You still have to be able to, it's historical materials too. They didn't have rubber, so or neoprene. But these days people do fight. Like some people use lacrosse gear for longsword sparring, and modern things like that.
So what's the heaviest sword, the weight of the swords that you've worked with?
Well, a spadone is probably the heaviest sword I've used. The spadone is also called the great sword. Those are the ones that are, as tall as I am, and they're, the handle itself is this long, and what they're basically used for. They would be crowd clearing swords. So one person with a spadone could hold an alleyway. Or say if you were on a battlefield and you had a standard, it's always very important to protect the standard of your army. And you'd leave one person with a spadone there or a great sword there, because one person can swing it around and keep a lot of people at bay.
So how much does that weigh?
That one is about 4 or 5 pounds, maybe.
That's a good weight to be swinging around.
Yeah.
So everybody stay on the good side. So a little bit more on to, I want to get into the editing and the writing. So how long have you been writing and editing?
Writing, almost like writing, I've been doing most of my life. I've got my mom saved booklets that I made when I was 4 years old with, one word per page, but nonetheless, I was putting books together back then. And I started writing novel. I wrote a novel when I was about 14, or I didn't write it. It wasn't a whole novel. It was a few chapters of a novel, which has been lost in the mists of time, very thankfully, and will never see the light of day.
Yeah, some stuff we want to lose, right? We don't.
Yeah,
I wrote that a long time ago. I don't want to see that again.
Yeah, the thing about writing is that even when you're just learning how to do it and practicing, it's on page and it can be saved. When you're learning the clarinet or something, nobody's recording those first attempts. No, when you're learning how to dance, nobody's videoing you learning how to dance. But when you're learning how to write, you're putting it down on paper and it can be saved. And that's not necessarily a good thing.
So for the editing, how long have you been doing editing?
I I guess I started doing with the Childbearing Society in, I guess probably around 2000s, early 2000s. I was putting together their newsletter, so that's when I started sort of doing it as a job. And I did their newsletter, and I put together their handbook, and then I was doing other sort of freelance editing. And then in 2013, my writing partners and I put together Pulp Literature magazine, and so then that's been full on editing since then.
So are you working with like any organizations or uh, for writing, like writing programs or anything like that in BC?
No, we have at Pulp Literature, we do have our own writing program, which is it was on hiatus at the moment. We'll be reviving in 2023, which is Quit the Day Job. And, we'll be providing writing courses there. I do teaching at conferences and things like that, or I've been invited to teach at the Editors Canada workshops and things like that. So, I do sort of sporadic gigs, I would say.
So what is it about editing that you enjoy?
I like making things better.
I love that answer. Right? That needs to be fixed. It's like the song in the movie, right? The Wicked
Yeah.
Woman. Like,
Yeah. I mean, it's it's very satisfying. It's very satisfying to take something that's you can see something in and polish it to bring the beauty out, like it's an old cliche about a diamond in the rough. You can and then when you polish it, then you turn it into something that's presentable in a necklace or something.
so it's that little final touch that you need to put on.
Yeah.
So now let's get into the childbirth educator. What's that all about?
Well, I after my first daughter was born, I decided I got quite interested in childbirth, and I ended up taking a childbirth educator's course through. Well, at the time it was Vancouver Community College. It's since moved to Douglas College. Then I had my twins, and then after that started teaching, and I did that, I guess, for about 7 years. And then after about 7 years, I decided, I think I've done all I need to do here. But ironically, and this is a scoop. This is the first place anybody's hearing this publicly. I am kind of thinking of dipping my toes back into the childbirth and postpartum field again. I find myself yelling at the television a bit when there are news articles on, and feeling like I have some information out there that I need to share. So yeah, I'm thinking of, I don't know whether it's going to be a podcast or a newsletter or something called, and the working title is Desert Island Parenting, which is, I feel like new mothers are just bombarded by all this information from all these sources. And I always, when I was doing postpartum support, I'd always ask moms, well, what would you do if you were on a desert island and there was nobody else around? How would you be handling your baby? How would you be dealing with sleep and things like that? And usually, well, that's kind of what you should be doing, is you should be sleeping when your baby sleeps. You get by as best you can, and that's usually what's best for baby and what's best for you.
We have a question here. Someone's asking, what is postpartum?
Oh, postpartum is just the period after your baby's born. So it's usually considered about 3 months, but it it ranges. I mean, it's also used in the term postpartum depression, which can happen anytime up to 3 years after the birth.
Oh,
So it's kind of a vague term. It just literally means after birth.
I didn't know that it was up till 3 years.
Yeah, the vulnerable times for postpartum depression are right after the birth, when all those wonderful pregnancy hormones have just gone out of your system. And if breastfeeding isn't going well and you're not getting the hormones from breastfeeding, that's oftentimes when postpartum depression can set in. But it can also set in, like, when you stop breastfeeding later on, or just from other life, other life events can trigger it as well. But generally, the highest risk factor is just when you stop breastfeeding. Especially, if you do it cold turkey, that's usually a big trigger for postpartum depression.
So you mean like cold turkey for breastfeeding causes?
Yeah, like you suddenly stop breastfeeding, right? And as opposed to the gradual sort of, normally what happens, you breastfeed less and less, and finally, eventually you just stop. It's getting you down to 1 feed a day, and then suddenly the baby, or usually a toddler by that time, isn't interested anymore. And so that's a very graduated weaning. When you just stop immediately, what your body thinks, when suddenly you stop breastfeeding, your body thinks that your baby has died. I mean, our body doesn't know that, like intellectually we know our baby's fine, but if you just suddenly stop breastfeeding, the hormone system of your body is reacting as if you have, and it's making your primitive brain think that you've got a dead baby or something's happened to your baby. That's why it's not drinking anymore. I mean, that's a very anthropomorphic way of thinking of your body, but I guess your body is I mean, your body is human. But yeah, so that's a big trigger for postpartum depression, and our society's terrible at dealing with it. We have such a bizarre system with a nuclear family where we don't have all our aunties and grandmas and things like that around us, like urban Bible.
Well, and there's not a lot of information out there either about postpartum depression, right? It's actually kind of slidden under the rug.
Yeah, it's not, people don't like to talk about it. Is mental illness, and people don't like to talk about mental illness. People don't want to seek treatment for it because they feel like they're a bad mom if they do, and so people don't want to talk about it. There are a lot of resources out there. Out here in the Vancouver area, there's Pacific Postpartum Depression Society, so you can definitely, those are people you can contact. If you're feeling like you're disconnected from your baby, you're feeling like you might harm your baby, something like that, reach out. If you don't, somewhere else in the country, reach out to your public health nurse or your doctor.
So we have another question here for you, JM, and they're saying you're a childbirth educator. Does that mean you deliver babies?
No, childbirth educator means I teach prenatal and postpartum classes. I was also a doula, which is labor support, and I also don't deliver babies, but a doula is just there to support the mom in labor. And we also have postpartum doulas, which support moms after the birth.
So that's like the Lamaze classes and all that, right? The prenatal classes.
Yeah.
So we have a question here. What age do you think breastfeeding should stop?
That's a pretty personal question. I mean, it really depends. When you look at other mammals, breastfeeding, weaning naturally happens when the permanent teeth start to come in. I mean, we call them milk teeth, like in horses and puppies and things like that. We call them milk teeth, and they fall out. And when they start to fall out, that's usually the natural time that mammals wean. Now, kids don't start losing their teeth until they're 5, usually. That's a long time to breastfeed. There is certainly no harm in breastfeeding to that age. Obviously, that's not your child's sole source of nutrition, but there's so many benefits to it. It increases, immune function. I was really sad when I finally did stop breastfeeding, because breast milk makes this wonderful. It's a wonderful antibiotic. So anytime you had like a little scratch or something on your hand, I would put a drop of breast milk on it, rub it in. It's fatty, it's soothing, it felt good, and it healed it up. It was better than polysporin. So you had this medicine chest attached to your chest.
Yeah, my daughter, my granddaughter, when she had an eye infection, she actually gave her milk in the eye and it
Yep.
cleaned up the infection.
Yep. Well, it works a charm. So yeah, no, there's no harm in breastfeeding up, up until they'll generally stop themselves. I mean, one thing to remind parents who are thinking, well, if I don't wean my baby, will my baby ever wean themselves? And it's like, there's no child that ever went to college still breastfeeding.
Yeah, they eventually said, hey, you know what, I'm done with this.
There's no child that ever went to college still sleeping in their parents' bed either, for those people worried about co-sleeping. They do grow up, and it's a really small period of time when you think about it over the course of a lifetime. Even if your kids are coming into your bed when they're 5 and 6 years old because they can't sleep by themselves, that's still such a small slice of your life to give up, having your bed to yourself. Believe me, you will miss it once they're in their 20s. You'll miss that they came to you for comfort.
So we have another question here. The questions are not coming in the studio, but they're popping up here on my phone. Is it costly to sword fight?
It's sort of, as sports go, it's kind of in the medium range. It's not as expensive as horseback riding. Horseback riding is one of the most expensive. It's not as cheap as dance. Dance is probably the cheapest. So you do need some equipment. But if you come to Academy Cavallo or Academy Duello, which is the sister school in Vancouver, we have loaner equipment. So when you're first starting out, your real only expense is the cost of classes. And our intro class is $120 for a month. So it's pretty affordable.
So another question here we have is, where can they get swords?
Oh, believe it or not, you can get them on Amazon these days.
Right? Amazon got everything.
I know. There are a lot of retailers, depending what you want, like whether you want a training sword, whether you want a replica sword. I did mention the steel swords that we use on the ground, but when we're on horseback, we use nylon swords. So they're the same shape, the same proportions as a historical longsword, but they're made out of nylon, so they're a little bit lighter and a little bit safer for the horses, because the horses didn't ask for this.
That was my biggest fear when I first read that you were sword fighting on a horse. I was like, wouldn't the horse be afraid, like, of the banging and the chinging? But like you said, it almost puts them to sleep, right? So,
well, they get used to it. I mean, it is the noise that scares them the most at first, right? Like, you pick up a sword and you wave it past their face a few times, and a well-trained horse goes, oh, okay, this is fine. And then you come and you start tapping it against somebody else's sword, and they will pick up their ears and they'll go, oh, what's that noise? And you keep tapping and they go, oh, okay, this is nothing to worry about. So that, and again, the noise of the nylon, we also use wood swords too. It's loud, but it's not quite as loud as the steel swords. And again, we just don't use the steel on horseback. It's just too risky.
So you use the wooden sword on the horse?
Wooden or nylon, yeah.
So what's the difference, like the nylon between the metal? Like the nylon ones are the ones that bend, right?
Yeah, they're flexible. not super flexible, but they have some give to them, and they're blunt. Like they cannot be sharpened. You can still. I have had my little finger broken with a nylon sword. Like if you hit hard enough with it. But they're just generally a lot safer.
So, Jen, JM, if I ask you what your tea is tonight, what would your tea be?
Well, it's very similar to yours. I mean, I am a teacher, um, and I guess the E would be, editing. And the A and the A would be
I wasn't expecting the editing. I was expecting the educator
well,
with the editing.
teaching and
So that means you
educating.
really like editing. You really like putting that final touch on.
Well, editing is educational too. Like it's because when we're editing at Pulp Literature, you know, we do the editing on Google Docs, and we do it in suggestion mode so the author can see the edits and has a chance to address them. So it sometimes we take stories that are not quite ready for prime time and we work with the author to bring them there. And those are quite rewarding when we get those stories and we get them because it does help authors see how they new authors see how they can word things better, how they can make things clearer for the reader, things like that. So that would be my E, and I guess the A would be for authorship, I guess, because I do like telling stories. That's and I think stories are important. I think stories are how we understand the world, and fiction can be truer than reality sometimes, and fiction can be more impactful than reality sometimes.
Well, storytelling is really important, right? Because it brings back the history as well,
Yeah.
or the future telling. Uh,
Mhm.
we could always be telling about the future, visions that we have. I always wondered about futuristic novels and books and that. Like, do they have dreams? Do they have visions? Like, where does it come from? And same as the past. The past is it something that's within us that we hunger for to understand? Because for me, I love history. I love understanding the vintage, the detail, the like you don't see that anymore. Like even with wood, like wooding and all that, like building landscapes and
Mm.
staircases and that. There was a lot of detail back in the day. Now you just see like a regular, just a little handle, and it's like there's your railing, right? Where
Yeah.
back in the day it was really detailed, and I think that's what I like about the history. I love the detail of each piece put together. Even the clothing, like I looked at some of the pictures on the covers of your books, and I was just like, wow, really incredible. And then I'm like, it must have took a long time to get dressed.
It did. It did. Some of those historical outfits, um, you know, like if you were nobility, you actually had somebody to help you get dressed because in the Middle Ages, the sleeves were separate and they would sew them on every morning, like with a basting stitch.
Wow.
And then they could take them off because also your sleeves would get dirty more, like they get dragged through whatever you're working on. Um, but as you go up through the centuries, you have things like corsets that you need a maid to help you tighten your corset. You have many, many layers and elaborate hairdos and things like that that you need help with. But a lot of the peasant dress was also complicated because they had a lot of layers because it was cold. They didn't have central heating.
Well, in the summertime, though, they must have been really hot because they still wore those extra layers, did they not?
Well, they did, but well, you do get used to wearing extra layers. And they would, you would see pictures of peasant women, with their skirts tied up around their knees. You see paintings of them working in the fields with skirts gathered around their knees, things like that. Um, and they would, you have the ability to, remove your outerwear, right? You can remove your coat, and you've just got a blouse. You'd probably wear fewer petticoats in the summer than you would in the winter.
So was the wardrobe part of your in what word am I looking for? Your encouragement to get into the 17th century, like
No. Like I don't do much dressing up or anything like that. I know there are people who, like in the Society for Creative Anachronism, who wear historical garb and things like that. Yeah, that's too much work for me.
I always was like, how long does it take to get dressed, and then how long does it take to get undressed, and then I'm just like, that's half the day there, right there.
Exactly. Um, and the thing is, I don't actually want to live in the past. I'm fascinated by the past. I love science fiction. I'm fascinated with the future. But if you gave me a choice of living in the past or the future, I'd choose the future, because I don't want to go back to, a lot of times the past is romanticized. It was simpler times and stuff. But, really, it didn't. It sucked being a woman in the past. I mean, it still sometimes sucks being a woman today, but it really sucked in the past. Your life expectancy was not that great if you were having children. Uh, there was more sexism and racism than we experience today. So, things are getting better. Sometimes it doesn't always feel like that, but I do have faith that humanity is, two steps forward, one step back, but gradually making progress.
Now, do you think by writing these books that you're bringing a light to women's rights?
I hope so. I mean, I am a I am a raging feminist. you know,
She's a sword holder, so
yeah. Um, I mean, my my fantasy trilogy is about three women. It's a story, and it's a fantasy, but it's really women's fiction dressed up as fantasy. It's a story about mothers and daughters, and the lies they tell to each other, and the secrets that they hold. But I mean, I'm not interested particularly in writing about men, because I feel like men have been written about so much. There's so much out there, so much written out there from a male point of view with a male gaze that we could go without any more novels from men for 100 years and we'd still be catching up. So yeah.
so JM, I asked you what your favorite color was, and you gave me cobalt blue. Why
Mhm.
that color?
When I used to paint miniatures, that was always my favorite color. It's just as an acrylic paint color, it's my favorite blue. Um, Pretty close to the blue on your shirt.
Yeah. Well, and that's what, and for all the viewers and listeners out there, Miss Liz always asks us what all of my guests what their favorite color is. And if you're paying attention, you'll see Miss Liz wearing similar colors or close to the color. Because sometimes I get a blue and I'm like, oh, okay, I can wear a blue. But then when I
Well,
get a certain kind of blue, I'm like, oh, where am I going with this?
well, you got it pretty close. I was actually wearing this earlier today, but it got too warm, so I took it off.
Yeah, I was like, how do I get a cobalt blue? Like that's a hard one. So I'm gonna have to start looking for color coded clothes here. So, and I also asked you what word describes you as a person, and you gave me the word fierce. Why fierce?
um, because I get I can get angry quite easily at injustice. Injustice makes me furious, and that is, that is when I sort of figuratively, pick up my sword and get on my horse. Um, yeah.
Well, I think it's within you, right? Because you said like you're a massive feminist, and you're for women's rights and all of that, and and the horse riding and the writing and the childbirth. Like it tells me a lot about you as a person that don't mess with me. Like, I might look sweet, but don't mess with me because I'm fierce. I'm coming for you.
Oh, I'm a Leo too.
Oh, well, there you go, right? We had Leo, don't mess. Like, so any final words and any message that you would like to give to any of the viewers and listeners out there?
Um, well, I would say to anybody, like, I've done so many different things, and we didn't even touch on, you know, artwork and things like that. I do so many things, and sometimes I think, well, I just divide my attention so many ways. How can I ever be good at something? But I would not feel complete if I ignored those parts of me. If I ignored the artistic part of me, if I ignored the the fierce part of me. So, to everybody out there, like, embrace what you are. Embrace everything that you are, all the parts, even the not so great stuff, even the traits that other people may not like, whether it's being stubborn or shrill or angry or whatever. It's all needed to be a complete person.
Well, it's like you said, right? We didn't even touch on the art or anything because JM usually starts something and then it ends up turning into a profession. We were talking about that in the back studio before the show started. And we often do that. Like, we pick up a hobby and then we really get into it and we get passionate about it. And then we just, then we got to dig deeper and deeper and deeper. So we have a couple seconds left, a couple minutes here before we wrap up. I want to get into the art really quick because you mentioned the color cobalt blue, and you said art. So I want to just get into that before we wrap up.
Well, I don't do as much of it anymore as I would like to, but my first novel I did do pencil illustrations for, which my colleague Mel then inked. I used to draw comic books. I studied with David Lloyd, who you may know from V for Vendetta, um, and and I mean, art is in my family. My mother is a painter. My daughters are amazing painters. They're far better than I am. Um, they do, photorealistic animal portraits and things like that. Uh, my great my great aunt was Prudence Heward, who was one of fairly famous Canadian painter. Um, so yeah, painting is in my blood, and art is in my blood, and it's something that I haven't, just like the music, I haven't picked it up enough, and I do want to get back to it at some point in my life, and I hope that will be soon. You mentioned the covers of my books. Those are not by me. Those are by the amazingly talented Melissa Mary Duncan. She did the covers of all three of those books, plus the current issue that I showed you there was our Pulp Literature. She did that as well. But it draws me. Like, I love that kind of artwork.
It's beautiful artwork, really, really beautiful. So I want to thank you, JM, for joining me and having tea with me tonight and sharing a little bit about sword fighting, childbirth, education, postpartum depression. We touched on a lot of subjects tonight. And to all the viewers and listeners out there who tune in all day to watch all three tea times, thank you for your support. I really encourage you to check out next Thursday when we have 3 more new tea times coming. And we do have topics that may trigger some people. So if it does trigger you, I won't be offended if you do not tune in. I do know that you support on the side for those harder subjects. So thank you again. And JM, I want to thank you for bringing the 17th century to the table, some sword fighting and some fierce womanhood, because we really do need some strong women out there. So again, thank you so much for joining me tonight, and thank you to the listeners, viewers, and you can always watch the replays on the YouTube channel or on all podcast stations that Ms. Liz's Tea Time can be found on. So again, thank you, and I will see you next Thursday, same time, same place, for 3 tea times. That's right, we're doing 3 every Thursday for this year. So 10 a.m., 3 p.m., and 7 p.m. 3 different tea times, 3 different guests, 3 different teas to make a difference. So thank you all for tuning in for Tea Time and for season 4. We are out until next week.
Thank you.